So as Peter Pan is now officially in the public domain, there have been countless amounts of Peter Pan movies out there, no less from Warner Brothers and Universal. So now when Disney are doing their live action remake based on the classic 1950s animated film, there were very high expectations on this film. And surprisingly, I feel like unlike the live action remake that Disney did specifically with Pinocchio, which was a bit of a mess, I have to say this film just packs so much emotion by the end of it, which is a little bit frustrating as you do have to travel a lot in this movie before it finally gets really good. And you know, it is really easy to hate on this movie, and some of it, I have to say, is justifiable, as the first act of this movie is so terrible for a number of different reasons. For example, it's really questionable acting, it being overly childish, and actually surprisingly being pretty uninspiring. But like I said, once you pass all of that, the next part of this movie is actually really, really good, and it asks some questions to the audience, which the audience have always wanted to know the answer to. For example, why does Captain Hook hate Peter Pan so much? How on earth did Peter Pan even get into Neverland? How did Captain Hook get into Neverland? And where is Peter Pan from? I think it's so brilliant how it asks all of these questions, whilst also retracing all of the things that classic fans would want to see in this film from a nostalgia point of view. So like I said, the end product of this film does work, but they definitely could have improved the first act. And one of the key central themes of this movie is the concept of time. And I mean, time has always been a big prevalent part in all of the Peter Pan storylines and mythologies. For example, Captain Hook being really afraid to grow up, and Peter Pan always wanting to just never grow up and wanting to stay as a child. And lots of different audience members are able to identify with all of these different characters because of this. And of course, Wendy is at a place where she doesn't know whether she wants to grow up and continue with all of the things that are going to happen from a time perspective. But I have to say, in this movie, they put a new lens on it, and I absolutely loved it. So for example, you really do get to see quite literally that Captain Hook hates the ticking of a clock, as he is just so fearsome of dying. Contrastingly, Peter Pan feels allergic to the concept of wanting to grow up and just wants to stay a child, as he just feels that, you know, being innocent and not having a care in the world and be frivolous, and just believes the concept of growing up to not be that attractive or appealing. So, you know, you can really see where both of these different characters are coming from a time perspective. And there are lots of allegories of time. For example, the crocodile killing and being after Captain Hook, representing his ticking time bomb, which incidentally is actually something that they changed from the animated film to this live action film in terms of how Captain Hook almost kills Peter Pan. And speaking of which, like I said before, I do feel like it retraces all of the key beats and all of the key steps from the classic animated 1950s film, whilst also doing things in a really innovative, unexpected, and subverting your expectations kind of way, which I do think is really, really important, as like I said, there have been so many countless adaptations now of Peter Pan, doing multiple different things. For example, retracing the key storyline going into the future in Return to Neverland, as well as going into the past in terms of exploring what really happened in the past. So they can get the origin storyline of how Peter Pan even came to Neverland, which I do feel like this film kind of borrows from in some respects. And I did think the idea of Peter Pan being in existence within this universe as a fairy tale was a really interesting storytelling device. I just wish that they would have done a little bit more with that. So now let's look at the dislikes of this one first. So like I said, I feel like it is just unbelievably childish in the first instance, to the point where it's just so off-putting that I was really close to just switching this film off, as it was just coming across as being only made for kids, which was really surprising, as Disney, Pixar, and all of the animation studios have come so far in terms of making their properties for all ages. So it was just really surprising that this film wasn't doing a good job, especially as, like I said, by the end of this movie, there are some brilliant moments. So it was just so off-putting to see this happening in the beginning. And I have to say, I do feel like Peter Pan, unfortunately, is miscast in this film. I definitely do applaud the diversity, but the person that they chose, unfortunately, has no charisma. And a character like Peter Pan needs to have charisma in spades for multiple different reasons. Firstly, because he just loves to just stay a child for so long. And then, of course, he has to be a bit of a leader figure to all of these Lost Boys and to a lot of other characters too. And it was just such a shame that this actor just wasn't able to level up from that perspective. But that being said, I do feel like he was really good from a sword fighting point of view. against Captain Hook. Now, speaking of the Lost Boys and the pirates, I think they were just a bit of a joke as well, as they were also being incredibly childish in the first act of this movie. And it was just so off-putting, as some of their jokes were really, really cringy, and just as a group of characters, they just weren't working as much as they should have been, as they could have and should have been so much more epic, especially as Pirates of the Caribbean has showed how you brilliantly balance the drama and the comedy from a pirate's perspective. And then we have Captain Hook, who, like I said, did get incredible by the end of this movie, but as far as the first act of this film was concerned, he was just such a panto villain. Mr. Smee, by comparison, was pretty consistent across this film, but I wish Captain Hook just grabbed everyone right in the beginning to really make his mark known. Some of the flying sequences were really believable when they were using wires and strings from a small level perspective, but when they were flying across Neverland, you can just tell that they are just in front of a green screen, and it was a little bit off-putting as it didn't look as miraculous as it should have been. And then my final criticism is I was aiming to try to be super overly realistic, but I feel like it didn't really achieve it in the best possible way. I mean, if you are going for pure realism, then you have to fully go into it, but it was going into it half-heartedly, and it just did not work, as it just stripped out all of the magic. There was no awe, no wonder. I mean, some of the flying sequences, like I said, were okay, but there was just nothing impressive to look at on screen. But then this was mirrored with other bits that were just a bit overly jokey, a little bit childish. So it was just ended up being a bit of a weird concoction. And I just feel like instead, if they just lent into the magic a little bit more, I do feel like from a cinematography point of view, it could have looked even better, as it just came across as them being a little bit cheap and just using the justification of, you know, we are trying to be a lot more realistic as an excuse. As like I said, unfortunately, all of the set pieces were just really, really weak, and the decision to make it more realistic didn't even come across that effectively from a storyline point of view. So even though it was intentional, like I said, they definitely should have and could have executed it in a much more slicker way. But now let's talk about the positives. So I have to say, I absolutely love the diversity that they had in this film, especially as some of the other live action remakes did get a lot of criticism, especially for whitewashing the Tiger Lily character. So I think they did a really good job of being really representative in this movie, and I feel like it wasn't too forced. Like I said in my criticism section, some of the acting could have been better, and I definitely feel like they should have casted a couple of roles a lot more effectively, but that's of course a different matter. From a diversity point of view though, I do feel like they did a really good job in this film. And I also think it was really impressive how they put a new lens on all of the adults versus the kids sequences, as some people have criticized Peter Pan of being a little bit cringy and a little bit strange, that Captain Hook is constantly fighting children and is constantly wanting to kill Peter Pan, whereas in this film they put a new lens and new meaning and new perspectives and new storylines on the justification for why Captain Hook has such a burning hatred for Peter Pan. And I just thought the reveal of why Captain Hook hates Peter Pan so much was just done so brilliantly. And I think Jude Law just played that so well. It was just so tear-jerking, so emotional, and you can just feel it fully from James Hook's point of view, and it was just done so well. This is also a bit of a spoiler warning, as I am going to be talking about some of the reveals that have now been taking place from the second act of this movie onwards. So if you haven't seen this movie yet, then definitely check it out and then come back. Or if you don't mind things being spoiled, or more important, if you have seen this film, then let's deep dive into it a little bit more. As much as I did love that storyline reveal though, one thing that I wish they would have done is explained a little bit more effectively about why Captain Hook ages, as it was revealed that he didn't go back to the normal space in which he was from, but actually did kind of stay in the outskirts of Neverland. So if he is within this area, why is he aging up and nobody else is? And then after this reveal has been made, I thought the next couple of sequences between Hook and Peter Pan were just so brilliant. And you can literally feel it, as I do feel like in some ways it is a little bit relatable, as everybody has had a bit of a friendship that has just gone wrong. So I feel like that aspect is super identifiable. And then it was just so emotional when Peter Pan is then apologizing to Captain Hook, as quite frankly, he has ruined James Hook's life, and he does realize that and is just so regretful for it. And then when he is apologizing and dropping his sword, and Captain Hook's like, look, you can't do that. You don't have the right to be able to do that. And then, you know, you can see that Peter Pan is being so sincere about this. And then still Captain Hook dies. Oh my God, that was an absolute dagger to the heart. And it was just executed so brilliantly. And it was just so brilliant how it instantly reframes this movie that actually, if you look at it from Captain Hook's point of view, he is actually the main lead character of this film and is the one that has been pushed out, has been neglected, and in some respects, he kind of sees Peter Pan as his villain, which I just thought was such a mind-blowing realization. And then when you look at it from that point of view, you're like, look, Peter Pan did banish this guy and did push him when he didn't agree with him in terms of wanting to remain kids in Neverland, and kind of was a little bit territorial and kind of viewed Neverland as his own place and his own rules, and if you don't follow the rules of Peter Pan, then you're not welcome in Neverland. So pushed him out, completely ruined his life. But then again, if you look at it also from Peter Pan's point of view, you know, he is a flawed character, he is a child, so really should he be making these massive mega decisions that impact other people's lives? So it ends up being so sophisticated, which, like I said, you really don't expect it based on how disappointing the start of this movie is. And if anything, I just would have wanted more sequences between Jude Law's Captain Hook character and Peter Pan. Like I said, I wish that they did a better job in terms of casting Peter Pan, as I feel like if there was a better actor there, he definitely could have leveled up to Jude Law's awesome acting ability in those sequences. But nonetheless, the moments between Peter Pan and Captain Hook in the final act of this movie were just pure class. And then when you do kind of see that Captain Hook comes back to life, and then you see the exchange between these characters, you don't know if, you know, maybe Peter Pan wants to continue the rivalry because maybe this is giving Captain Hook the lust for life and kind of gives him something to live for, or if finally they're going to rekindle their friendship, or maybe Peter Pan is going to show Hook how to get out of Neverland. I feel like it could be really interesting to see what could happen next. Another positive in this film is that I feel like they really celebrated girl power without overdoing it, without overshadowing it. As of course in the classic animated film, people were really criticizing the fact that, you know, Tinkerbell, Tiger Lily and Wendy were all fighting each other for the attention of Peter Pan, whereas in this film, all three characters are independent and very much have their own particular storyline and definitely are empowering from a role model perspective. And I think some of the sequences in particular with Wendy were really, really brilliant. As of course, she is also in the name of this title film, and she really is a bit of a co-lead in this film. If anything, you're kind of following it from Wendy's perspective, and she is kind of coming across Captain Hook and coming across Peter Pan. So her moment where she is then officially using the Tinkerbell powers all for herself and is able to turn the boat around with the help, of course, of Tinkerbell and saving the day from all of the pirates, all of the Lost Boys. I feel like those moments were absolutely brilliant. And this finally had the payoff that she kind of always wanted in terms of finally being able to hear Tinkerbell's voice and Tinkerbell being really happy for the fact that Wendy can even hear her. And there have been loads of different interpretations about whether or not the Lost Boys want to remain in Neverland or if they want to escape back into the real world. So it was really nice to kind of see them escaping into the real world, but Peter Pan isn't willing yet to come out of Neverland as he just wants to stay young forever. I wish that they would have explored a little bit more about what happened with his mother, but I thought it was a really nice touch how the original home that he left ended up being the same home that Wendy is now occupying. And I do actually think that that storyline theme is really, really brilliant. I feel like if they had dived into that a little bit more about the power of youth, the power of imagination, the fact that when you grow up you kind of lose this, and this is definitely something that Peter Pan is really fearful of, as I feel like this as a concept is definitely something that a lot of people can identify with. Of course on a bit of a superficial level of, you know, not wanting to grow up, but also the importance of not forgetting your childhood power and childhood youth. From a story arc perspective, I loved the fact that, you know, in the beginning Wendy is being quite hard on her mother. She is not sure about whether or not she even wants to grow up, but after all of the adventures that she has in Neverland, she is then really nice to her mother. She can then value her mother, and she is also now really happy from her own point of view to want to grow up, to want to see what's going to happen next in her life, and is now actually really excited about this. So I love the fact that, you know, this character just learns so much through the journey that she goes on in Neverland. And even though a lot of other movies have definitely looked at this topic, I absolutely loved it how this interpretation of Peter Pan really does show the importance of mothers, as you can really see it from Peter's point of view, of course Captain Hook's point of view, as this is the determination of what made him ultimately want to leave Neverland, and then of course from Wendy's point of view as well. So all three central lead characters, you can really see the importance of mothers. So even though there have been so many different interpretations of Peter Pan, I have to say by the end of this movie, Peter Pan and Wendy was definitely one of the better ones. And I loved it that you can also compare this movie to Narnia in terms of characters just escaping into this magical world where a lot of treachery and potential death can take place, which I think is pretty terrifying. And also from Lord of the Flies in terms of a group of kids suddenly being on this deserted island and then just working out what on earth to do next and not having the capability to make the best decisions for one another, as ultimately they are still kids. So overall, even though this movie isn't without its problems and definitely isn't a perfect film, by the end of it, I have to say, it was just so good. There are so many interesting themes, so many new character dimensions, and truly emotional moments that you can actually learn so much from. It's just such a shame that you have to go through a pretty flawed first act before things start to get better. But you know, for all of those reasons, I'm going to give Peter Pan a solid 6 out of 10. Now I'd love to hear what you thought of this film, so please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in my next video.